My mom erased my dead sister's memory and used a foster child as her replacement, so we kicked her out and assumed everything was over, until she returned year later, begging for another chance and talking about a dark family secret that would change our lives forever. After my sister drowned, my mom adopted a girl her age and started calling her by my sister's name. Lily had passed away 6 weeks ago. She had Down syndrome and was playing in the pool, and Mom told us she would watch her. One minute I was upstairs playing video games with my friends. The next, we were all gathered by the deck, watching my mom screaming and blowing air into Lily's mouth trying to revive her. After Lily's funeral, Mom barely spoke. She sat silently in Lily's untouched room, ignoring everyone. Dad tried coaxing her out gently, offering meals she barely ate. Then suddenly, as if a switch had flipped, she became manic and determined, speaking rapidly about adoption like she'd found some miracle cure. Emma arrived quickly through an emergency fostering program Mom had found. She was sweet and wide-eyed, barely 2 years old, looking nothing like Lily except for age. But Mom instantly dressed her in Lily's clothes, gave her Lily's toys, and even started accidentally calling her Lily. What hurt most was how quickly Mom erased Lily entirely. She banned us from talking about her, shutting down every attempt I made to visit Lily's grave. "Stop living in the past," she snapped whenever I mentioned my sister's name. But Emma wasn't Lily. Mom seemed relieved by that. She bragged constantly to family about Emma's quick learning and development, highlighting how easily she did things Lily never could. She showered Emma with praise and expensive toys, yet ignored everything I needed. She forgot my soccer games, skipped parent-teacher meetings, and brushed off my requests for help or attention. I started building model airplanes to cope, something Lily always loved watching. I even won a competition at school, but Mom barely acknowledged it. Dad noticed, offering awkward encouragement, but we both felt powerless to confront Mom's fragile mental state. As Lily's first death anniversary approached, I suggested a small memorial at Lily's grave, but Mom said no. She had already booked a photographer on that exact day, telling me these would be our first professional photos with Emma. "But what about Lil? There'll be plenty of anniversaries," she interrupted. That broke something in me. "You're pretending Lily never existed. You can't just replace her." Mom slapped me when I said that, eyes wild and angry. "Lily was suffering. Emma is everything Lily couldn't be." Dad stood frozen, eyes wide. Without another word, I ran to my room, slamming the door behind me. Hours later, Dad knocked and sat beside me. He looked drained. "Something's wrong with your mother," he whispered. "I've ignored it too long." We talked honestly about Mom's behavior, and we agreed Emma deserved better, not to be a replacement for a lost child. For the first time, Dad openly mentioned divorce and custody battles. I felt guilty, but also relief. We weren't pretending anymore. When family arrived days later for the photo shoot Mom planned, Dad and I were ready. Everyone stood awkwardly in our living room as the photographer set up. My chest tightened. Before Mom could pose Emma in another one of Lily's dresses, I spoke up. "Mom has erased Lily," I said clearly. "Emma deserves better. She's not Lily's replacement." Mom's face turned white, then red with anger. "Don't ruin this," she hissed. Dad stepped forward protectively as family began murmuring. "You called Lily broken," I said aloud, my voice shaking with suppressed grief. "You pretend she never existed and treat Emma like some perfect doll." My aunt gasped quietly. My uncle stared at Mom with disbelief. Mom's voice rose to a scream, her anger overtaking everything. "Emma is what Lily wasn't," she shouted. "Lily was an embarrassment." The room fell silent. The photographer looked at us like, what the heck is going on? My aunt took Emma into her arms, comforting the now scared toddler. Quietly, family members left, shaken and disgusted. Several called child services on the spot. The photographer asked my mom if this meant no photos, and she screamed at him to get out. In the following weeks, Emma was temporarily placed with my aunt. My mom packed her bags and left the night Emma was taken away. Dad and I started therapy, grieving Lily openly for the first time. Months later, after careful evaluation, Emma returned to us. Dad legally adopted her, and we slowly rebuilt something resembling a family. We thought everything was finally behind us. But then months later, Dad and I finally felt ready to clear Mom's belongings from storage. And among her papers, hidden behind old files, I found a manila envelope. Inside, there was a life insurance policy on Lily, worth $500,000, dated 18 months before her death. My hands trembled as I held the policy, the paper feeling unnaturally heavy in my fingers, like it carried the weight of terrible possibilities. The policy was detailed and specific, with Lily's full name and information clearly listed. The beneficiary was Mom alone, not both parents as I would have expected. The amount, $500,000, seemed enormous, especially for a child's policy. Most disturbing was the date, well before there had been any indication of health concerns for Lily. Dad was across the storage unit, sorting through Mom's winter clothes when I called him over, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. He took the papers from me, his forehead creasing as he read, the color draining from his face as he processed what he was seeing. seeing. He sank down onto a cardboard box of Mom's old books, the policy hanging loosely from his fingers as he whispered in disbelief about the amount and the date. My mind raced with horrific scenarios I didn't want to consider. The timing was too perfect. Mom watching Lily by the pool. The sudden behavior changes afterward. The money. The storage unit suddenly felt too small. The walls of cardboard boxes closing in around us. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed loudly in the silence that had fallen between us. Outside, I could hear people chatting as they accessed their own storage units. Their normal conversations, a stark contrast to the terrible suspicions forming in my mind. I couldn't bring myself to finish the question forming in my mind, but Dad looked up sharply, insisting that Mom loved Lily and couldn't have done something so unthinkable. But his voice lacked conviction, and I could see the same doubt in his eyes that was consuming me. Your mother loved Lily, he said firmly, but his voice wavered slightly. She would never. She couldn't possibly. He couldn't finish the sentence, his certainty crumbling visibly. We spent the next week in a fog of suspicion and dread. Dad contacted a lawyer friend who specialized in insurance fraud, speaking in hushed tones on the phone while I pretended not to listen. The lawyer, a man named Richard, whom I'd met at company picnics years ago, came to our house one evening after Emma was asleep. He reviewed the policy carefully at our kitchen table, his expression grave as he explained that the amount was unusually high for a child's policy, particularly one with Down syndrome who would typically be difficult to insure for such a sum. The timing is concerning, he admitted reluctantly, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. Taken alone, a parent insuring a child isn't unusual, but this amount, followed by a period, he trailed off, not wanting to voice the terrible suspicion aloud. Dad asked about investigating further, and Richard explained the process would be complicated and potentially traumatic for our family. He suggested starting with finding Mom and asking her directly about the policy before involving authorities. I couldn't sleep, haunted by images of Mom watching Lily struggle in the water, doing nothing to help. The thought made me physically sick, and I found myself avoiding the backyard, unable to look at the pool that had been drained and covered since that day. Nightmares plagued me, visions of Lily reaching out from the water, calling for help, while Mom stood watching impassively. I'd wake up gasping, sheets tangled around me, the sound of splashing water echoing in my ears. During the day, I moved through school in a daze, unable to focus on classes or conversations with friends. The pool, which had been covered with a heavy tarp since the day of Lily's death, took on a sinister quality in my imagination. I began taking the long way around the house to avoid even glimpsing it through the back windows. The sound of running water, even just a shower or kitchen faucet, made my heart race with anxiety. Then one evening, Dad came into my room where I was half-heartedly working on a new model airplane. He told me simply that he'd found Mom. She was staying at a small apartment 2 towns over, having gotten a job at a local bookstore and living quietly. He'd hired a private investigator, he explained, a decision he'd made without telling me to spare me additional stress. The investigator had located Mom within days, reporting that she seemed to be living a solitary life, going only between her apartment and work, occasionally shopping for groceries but otherwise keeping to herself. Dad thought we should confront her together, but I wasn't sure I wanted to see her again. Still, I needed answers more than I needed comfort, so I agreed. The drive was silent, tension filling the car like a physical presence. I clutched the insurance policy in my backpack, the manila envelope now worn at the edges from my constant handling. The highway stretched before us, streetlights creating pools of yellow light on the asphalt. It had started to rain lightly, droplets streaking across the windshield in chaotic patterns. Dad gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Neither of us turned on the radio, the silence between us filled with unspoken fears and questions. Mom's new apartment was in a modest complex, beige buildings with small balconies and a central courtyard. It looked anonymous and temporary, nothing like the home she'd created and maintained for our family over the years. Dad parked in a visitor spot, and we sat in the car for several minutes, gathering courage before approaching her door. When we pulled up to her apartment building, my stomach twisted into painful knots. She opened the door looking smaller than I remembered. Her hair was shorter, her face thinner, with new lines around her eyes. The woman who answered the door was a diminished version of the mother I remembered. Her once vibrant blonde hair was cut in a practical bob and had lost its luster. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loosely on her frame. But it was the change in her eyes that shocked me most. They seemed hollow, lacking the intensity that had always characterized her, whether in happiness or anger. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then she stepped back, inviting us in without a word. Her apartment was tiny, but meticulously neat. I noticed immediately that there were no photos anywhere, no personal touches. It felt temporary, like she was just passing through rather than making a home. The living room contained only the basics: a small sofa, a coffee table, a lamp, and a bookshelf filled with paperbacks that I assumed came from her workplace. The kitchen, visible beyond an archway, was similarly sparse: white appliances, bare countertops, a small table with 2 chairs that looked unused. She asked quietly about Emma, and Dad replied stiffly that she was good and staying with our neighbor Mrs. Peterson today. Mom nodded, her eyes darting nervously between us before asking why we were there. I couldn't hold back anymore. I pulled out the insurance policy and placed it on her coffee table. The manila envelope made a soft sound as it landed on the glass surface. Mom's eyes fixed on it immediately, recognition flashing across her face. She didn't reach for it or open it, just stared as if it might bite her. Her face changed as she recognized the document, but not with the guilt I expected. Instead, I saw pain and confusion in her eyes as she stated flatly that we thought she had done something to Lily. "You think I hurt my baby," she said, her voice hollow. "You think I let her drown for money." The bluntness of her statement hung in the air between us. Dad shifted uncomfortably on the sofa beside me, but I held her gaze steadily. When I asked if she had, my voice cracking with emotion, Mom covered her face with her hands. The question seemed to physically pain her. Her shoulders hunched forward as if absorbing a blow. For several long moments, she remained that way, her breathing audible in the quiet apartment. When she finally lowered her hands, her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, as if she had cried so much already there were no tears left. When she looked up, her eyes were wet with tears. She explained that she took out the policy because Lily had Down syndrome, and doctors had warned about potential heart problems later in life. Lily's cardiologist mentioned concerns at her checkup, Mom explained, her voice steadier now. Nothing immediate, but potential issues that might develop as she got older. He said many children with Down syndrome develop heart problems in their teens or early 20s. She had been scared something would happen to Lily and wanted to ensure they could afford whatever care she might need. "I was terrified," she continued, twisting her hands in her lap. "I started researching medical costs for heart surgeries, specialized care, potential long-term treatments. The numbers were astronomical, even with our insurance." I panicked. Dad questioned why she never told him about it, and Mom admitted she put the money in her personal account after Lily passed, unable to look at it or touch it because it felt like blood money to her. "I should have told you," she acknowledged, looking at Dad with regret. "But I was handling so many of Lily's medical appointments and special needs arrangements already. I didn't want to worry you with one more thing." She explained that after Lily died, the insurance company processed the claim automatically. The money went into her personal account, where it remained untouched. "I couldn't bear to use it," she said, her voice breaking. "Every time I looked at my bank statement and saw that balance, I felt sick. It was supposed to help Lily, not compensate for her absence. When I asked why she left us, she shook her head, asking how she could face us after what she did to Emma and what she said about Lily. I was so broken," she whispered. "After Lily died, something in me shattered. I couldn't process it, couldn't accept it. When Emma came, I thought I could start over, pretend the pain wasn't there, but I ended up hurting everyone. You, your father, Emma, and disrespecting Lily's memory. She told us she'd been seeing a therapist, trying to understand why she did those things. My therapist says I had a psychotic break," she explained, her clinical tone suggesting she'd rehearsed this explanation. "The grief was so overwhelming that my mind created an alternate reality where Lily's disability had been the problem and Emma was the solution. It wasn't true, of course. Lily was perfect exactly as she was. Something still didn't add up. I pressed her about being there when Lily passed, about how she was supposed to be watching her. Mom's face crumpled with grief as she explained she went inside to answer the phone. It was Aunt Maggie calling, keeping her talking about family drama. Maggie called about some disagreement with her husband, Mom recalled, her forehead creasing with the effort of remembering. Something trivial, vacation plans or in-law problems. I told her I needed to get back to Lily, but she kept finding new topics, new reasons to keep me on the line. When she realized how long she'd been on the phone, it was already too late. "I looked out the kitchen window and saw Lily floating face down," she said, her voice breaking. "I dropped the phone and ran. I pulled her out, started CPR immediately, screamed for help. I tried so hard to save her." Dad and I exchanged looks as Mom mentioned that Aunt Maggie had been at our house that day, arriving early for lunch. She was the one who called for help when Mom found Lily. The detail struck me as odd. In my memory of that terrible day, Aunt Maggie had arrived after the ambulance, expressing shock and horror at what had happened. But Mom was saying she had been there already, had witnessed the entire tragedy unfold. Dad carefully asked if Maggie was there that day, and Mom nodded, explaining that she arrived early for lunch and made the emergency call while Mom was trying to revive Lily. "Maggie was already at the house when it happened," Mom confirmed, looking confused by our reaction. "She arrived about an hour early for lunch. She was the one who called 911 while I was doing CPR on Lily." A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I asked if Aunt Maggie knew about the insurance policy. Mom looked up sharply, telling us that Maggie was the one who suggested it, reminding us that she worked in insurance and helped set it up. "Maggie works in life insurance," Mom said slowly, realization dawning in her eyes. "She's the one who told me about policies for children with special needs. She helped me fill out all the paperwork, used her company discount to reduce the premiums." The pieces started falling into place voice with sickening clarity. Aunt Maggie arriving early, the convenient phone call keeping Mom inside, and later, she was the one who took Emma when child services intervened. Maggie could see the pool from the guest bathroom window, Mom said, her voice growing stronger as connections formed. She used that bathroom when she arrived, said she needed to freshen up before lunch. Mom whispered that Maggie must have seen Lily in the pool from her bedroom window, which overlooked the backyard. She would have seen Lily struggling. The implication hung heavy in the air. If Maggie had seen Lily struggling in the water, why hadn't she raised the alarm immediately? Why make a phone call that would keep Mom occupied inside the house? Dad stood up abruptly, saying we needed to talk to Maggie immediately. Mom grabbed his arm, telling us there was something else we should know. Maggie's been calling me, Mom said, her voice trembling slightly. At first, she just wanted to check on me, or so she said, but lately, she's been asking about money, whether I received the insurance payout, what I did with it. Maggie had been calling her, asking about the insurance money, claiming she deserved some for helping with Emma. Last week, she called saying she deserved a finder's fee for helping set up the policy, Mom continued, her expression troubled. When I questioned her, she said she also deserved compensation for all she'd done for Emma after I left. My blood ran cold as I remembered that Maggie had been taking care of Emma on weekends sometimes. Since Emma had returned to live with Dad and me, Aunt Maggie had been surprisingly insistent about maintaining a relationship with her. She'd volunteer to babysit on weekends, often taking Emma to her house overnight. Dad had been grateful for the help, seeing it as Maggie's way of supporting our healing family. But now, those offers of help took on a sinister quality. Was Maggie using Emma to maintain a connection to our family? To keep tabs on us while pressuring Mom about the insurance money? I told Dad we needed to get home right away. The drive back was tense, with Mom sitting silently in the back seat, clutching her seatbelt with white knuckles. Dad drove well above the speed limit, his jaw clenched tight as he took corners too sharply. Mom gave directions from the back seat, having packed a small overnight bag in minutes after we explained our concerns about Emma. None of us spoke about the larger implications of what we'd discovered. There would be time for that later. Right now, Emma's safety was all that mattered. When we pulled into our driveway, Mrs. Peterson was outside looking worried. She told us that Dad's sister-in-law had picked up Emma about an hour ago, claiming we had asked her to. Mrs. Peterson was wringing her hands as she explained that Maggie had seemed in a hurry, barely giving Emma time to gather her favorite stuffed animal before bundling her into the car. Something about Mrs. Peterson's manner had struck her as odd, but she had no reason to question a family member with whom Emma regularly spent time. Dad's face went white as he told her we hadn't asked anyone to take Emma. We called the police immediately. The officer who responded took our concerns seriously, especially after Mom showed him the text messages from Maggie about the insurance money. These messages, increasingly demanding and thinly veiled in their threats, provided evidence of a potential motive for taking Emma without permission. They took our statements, looking skeptical, until Mom showed them the text messages from Aunt Maggie about the insurance money. They put out an alert for Maggie's car and told us to stay by the phone. The waiting was unbearable. Mom paced the living room, looking at Emma's toys scattered across the floor, repeatedly apologizing for everything. Hours stretched like days as we waited for news. Dad made coffee that grew cold in our cups. Mom moved restlessly around the house, picking up Emma's toys and putting them down again, straightening picture frames that didn't need straightening. I sat by the window, watching for police cars, jumping at every passing vehicle. Mom's apologies became a constant background noise. She was sorry for how she'd treated me, sorry for what she'd said about Lily, sorry for leaving when things got hard. I didn't know if I could forgive her yet, but watching her now, I could see she truly loved Lily, and Emma too, in her own broken way. The police called 3 hours later with news that they'd found Maggie and Emma at a bus station. Maggie was being taken in for questioning, and Emma was safe and on her way back to us. Relief washed over us in a physical wave. Dad sank into a chair, his head in his hands, while Mom burst into tears. I felt lightheaded with the release of tension, my legs shaky as I stood to look out the window again, this time watching for the police car that would bring Emma home. When Emma came through the door in a police officer's arms, Mom hung back, uncertain of her place. But Emma saw her and reached out, calling her Mama in her small voice. Emma looked confused but unharmed, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. She blinked in the bright light of our entryway, her eyes widening as she took in the unusual gathering of people, the police officers, Dad and me, and Mom standing uncertainly by the staircase. When Emma spotted Mom, something remarkable happened. Despite the months of separation, despite having no contact, Emma recognized her immediately. Mama, she called, reaching out with one arm while keeping her rabbit secure with the other. Mom looked at Dad, silently asking permission with her eyes. He nodded slightly, a small gesture of reconciliation. The moment hung suspended between them. Years of marriage, shared grief, terrible mistakes, and the beginnings of understanding all compressed into a single look. Dad's nod nod wasn't forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement that Emma's needs came before their complicated history. As Mom held Emma close, I thought about Lily, about how she'd want us to move forward, not to forget her, but to find a way to be a family again, carrying her memory with us. Lily had been the most forgiving person I'd ever known. Once, when a child at the park had knocked over her carefully built sandcastle, she'd simply smiled and invited him to help build a new one. More hands make more better, she'd said in her simple way, a philosophy that seemed particularly relevant now. The next few weeks were difficult, but healing. Aunt Maggie confessed to seeing Lily struggling in the pool and deliberately doing nothing. She admitted to keeping Mom on the phone intentionally, revealing that the insurance money had been her plan all along. The police investigation revealed the full extent of Maggie's deception. She had orchestrated the entire tragedy, suggesting the insurance policy, arriving early on that fateful day, making the calculated phone call to keep Mom distracted, and then watching as Lily drowned. Later, she had positioned herself to take Emma, perhaps hoping to leverage the child for financial gain, or simply to maintain control over our family. She now faced serious criminal charges for her role in Lily's death and the attempted kidnapping of Emma. Mom moved back in tentatively, taking the guest room as her bedroom. She and Dad weren't back together romantically, but they were communicating honestly, perhaps for the first time in years. Their relationship had transformed into something new, not husband and wife anymore, but co-parents united in their determination to protect Emma and honor Lily's memory. They attended therapy sessions together, working through the complicated tangle of grief, betrayal, and shared trauma that bound them. We visited Lily's grave together as a family. Mom placed a small model airplane on the headstone, one I'd made specially for Lily with her favorite colors. The cemetery was peaceful that day, sunlight filtering through the leaves of an old oak tree that stood near Lily's plot. Birds sang in the branches overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and nearby flower arrangements. Mom knelt by the headstone, tracing Lily's name with her fingertips. She whispered an apology to Lily for trying to erase her, acknowledging that she deserved better. "I'm so sorry, my sweet girl," she said softly, tears streaming down her face. "I thought I could escape the pain by pretending you never existed, but you deserve to be remembered and celebrated for exactly who you were." Emma came too young to understand fully, but sensing the importance. She placed a flower next to my airplane, repeating what we'd told her, that it was for Lily. "For Lily in heaven," Emma said solemnly, patting the headstone as if comforting it. She looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Lily is my sister too?" "Yes," I told her, kneeling down to her level. "Lily is your sister too, and she would have loved you very much." I watched my broken family standing there together and felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Not that things would ever return to how they were before. That was impossible. But maybe we could build something new and meaningful from the broken pieces of our lives. That night, I added another model airplane to my collection. This one had 3 figures in the cockpit instead of 2. Lily would always be with us, even if only in our hearts and memories. The model was my most detailed work yet, a vintage biplane painted in bright colors Lily would have loved. I'd crafted 3 small figures for the cockpit, one with short dark hair like mine, one with curly hair like Emma's, and one with a tiny ponytail like Lily used to wear. It had taken hours of painstaking work with the finest brushes I owned, but the result was worth it. And maybe, I thought as I placed the model on my shelf next to a photo of all of us, that was enough. Not perfect, not what we'd planned or expected, but enough to build a future on, one that honored the past without being trapped by it. In the photo, taken at Lily's 5th birthday, she was beaming at the camera, chocolate cake smeared across her cheek, her arms thrown wide in characteristic joy. Looking at her smile, I made a silent promise to live with the same openness and enthusiasm she had shown every day of her short life. That, I decided, would be Lily's true legacy, not tragedy or loss, but the reminder to embrace life fully and love openly, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts.